I'd like to begin by acknowledging two collaborating organizations, the Center for Community Energy and the San Diego chapter of the Sierra Club. We we have all invited friends and family to the presentation this evening, and we really appreciate the alliance and the opportunity to collaborate. Uh, After Dave's presentation, Kathy Nicholson will be joining us to help facilitate the Q&A part of the session this evening. And we also thank Kathy for joining us and being open to doing that. Let's turn to Dave for a moment. He's the Executive Director of Solar Rights Alliance. He's been a community organizer for over 30 years and believes people power is the best way to overcome special interests. That's us, people power. Prior to joining Solar Rights Alliance, Dave led a successful statewide ballot measure campaign in Oregon to restore career technical education for high schoolers. Before that, he led a 40,000 member public interest organization that successfully worked to reduce health insurance premiums for consumers and combat government corruption. In addition to spending quality time with family and friends, he enjoys running, swimming, yoga, backpacking, and reading. And Dave was here in San Diego County recently. I had an opportunity to listen to his presentation, and he graciously agreed to uh, share his expertise with us tonight. It was wonderful to see Dave in person, and I'm sure it'll be wonderful tonight too. Dave, let me turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Joe and Meryl and Kathy and Marion and everybody else for inviting me and having me here and attending, and to everyone here for just working to make the world a better place. It's a good way to it's a good way to live a life, is to work to make the world a better place. I'm going to share my screen and just get right into the presentation. So just give me 2 secs to work the tech. And if I could just get a thumbs up that you can see this slide. Great. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of rooftop solar in California as I see it, as the head of the Solar Rights Alliance. A little bit, you already heard a little bit about me. This is my immediate family, my wife and my kids. And I think the only other thing I'll just add is the origins of the Solar Rights Alliance um, come out of my community organizing work. I was involved in the uh, effort in the early aughts to convince Schwarzenegger to go big on rooftop solar, to fulfill a campaign promise to bring 1 million solar roofs to California. And we have 2 million solar rooftops in California. So you may think not a big deal, but back in the early aughts, there was virtually no rooftop solar in California. And to get it, you had to be wealthy or very technical. And this campaign succeeded. And shortly after the bills got signed and everything, a group of us who had been involved in that were, kind of giddy with excitement. Um, and one of the things we knew was that the utilities, which lobbied against this effort, and they always hated rooftop solar, they were really going to go after it once it scaled up. And so we at that time committed ourselves to, once we got around to hitting the millionth solar rooftop, millionth solar customer, that somebody would have to start essentially the NRA for solar users, or AARP, whatever you want to call it. And so that sort of die was cast back then, but it took in 2018, I got to be the lucky guy that started that group. And so that's the Solar Rights Alliance. And so a little bit about the Solar Rights Alliance. By the way, this photo was a group of people who went to Sacramento this June for the hearing where AB 942, the bill that would have gutted 2 million rooftop solar contracts, was effectively killed. These folks waited for like something like 5 hours before they could speak and testify, which is par for the course. And then this was right after um, we effectively defanged that bill, and we held that sign because we brought out Josh Becker and a couple of other senators who did the right thing to do a photo with them that they could put on their social media channel, and then we just took a photo ourselves. So that's the animating spirit of Solar Rights Alliance, is basically people like you. Um, and so we are a grassroots network of 150,000 California, mostly solar users, though we totally welcome people who don't have solar and support it, or might want it one day. But we're mostly people who have solar. Um, our mission is you have the right to make energy from the sun without unreasonable interference from the utilities or the government. That's it. That's our mission. Um, and we believe that you are your best advocate. And so there's only two of us who are paid to do this stuff, and we're going to keep it that way. That's intentional. Um, we think that the power comes from you, your voice. And so we track what the utilities and politicians are up to. We alert the public when there is a threat or an opportunity to rooftop solar. We provide guidance and training on how you can make the biggest impact, regardless of whether you have 1 minute to give or you have, hours to give. And our wheelhouse is kind of three things. I always like to kind of go through this because I'm a grassroots organizing nerd, and I like to kind of let people under the hood about like why we ask people to do the things that they do. Um, so one thing we always ask people to do, if you're on our list or you're adjacent to it, you'll know that we always ask people to send emails and make phone calls to whoever the decision makers are, often people in the legislature. And the 1-2 punch is the email and the phone call. One thing I always like to make a plug for is if you have never picked up the phone and called your legislator, I would imagine this is a group of people that tends to do that. But if you haven't, do it. Do send the email, but the phone call is really where the flywheel starts to move. So that's kind of like bread and butter number one. Then there's just speaking directly to your elected officials. This can take many forms. This is a group that just went right to Sacramento just to meet with their representatives right there. You can testify at committee hearings. You can go to town hall meetings. This is Assembly Member Bennett, Steve Bennett, and this is a constituent speaking to him, trying to convince him to stop the utility tax, which, as you know, has just come online at SDG&E territory. And then the third thing that we spend a lot of time on is protests and other things to get media coverage. And the reason why I term it that way is that anytime that if you've ever been invited to join a protest that we've organized, the only reason we do it is to generate media attention. Because when reporters and TV cameras and whatever then do news stories, then millions of people then can hear our message, and that can in turn put more pressure on the elected officials. And so we spend a lot of time thinking, how do we get the media to cover this stuff so that we can have a bigger megaphone than just even, our own list. So there's other things that we do as well, but these are kind of the three things that we put on lather, rinse, repeat. And this is the protest in Sacramento, again, to stop that utility tax. We were very busy on that. And I know you all were very involved in that too last year. Okay, so now to the meat, the opportunities and threats to rooftop solar. So here's the opportunity. It was good to start there, is that installing solar panels and batteries is just going to continue to get cheaper over time. It's not getting cheaper fast enough, and there's all kinds of barriers in the way. But the trend line, I'm willing to bet a lot of money, is going to continue to go down. And as it is already, even with all the nonsense, 60% of all California solar users are middle and working class people. So that's a tremendous success story that's worth, if you're not aware of that, just savor that for a moment. We're not quite at the point where solar and batteries is a car or a TV or a cell phone, but we're getting there. And that metric, I think, is one of the greatest clean energy success stories that's ever been done. And it happens here in California thanks to policies that both Republicans and Democrats put into place, and then helped bring this incredible technology, a bucket made out of silicon, basically, up on their roof so they could collect sunshine and power some of their lives with the free energy of the sun. How awesome is that? And that's just going to continue to get cheaper. And we're getting there. It's taking too long, but that's where we're getting, because solar solves a real problem in people's lives. And it's most people get solar not to protect the environment. They get solar because it cuts their electricity bill and it gives them more, keeps some of that wealth in their pocket rather than giving it away to a predatory utility. And that's awesome. That's a beautiful solution when people get it for all kinds of reasons, not just the one reason that you might think they get it. Um, and I could go on and on and on about just how awesome that is. It's only going to get cheaper, and the utilities product is only going to get more expensive. All right, so then the possibilities are really, really big. Right now, there's about 2 million solar users, which for those of you that are counting, that's about, and don't ding me if I'm wrong off by a gigawatt or two. Um, this is back of the envelope, but it's about 18 gigawatts of energy capacity, which in plain English is the equivalent of about 20 giant solar power plants in the desert. That's a lot of gigawatts. And that's honestly just scratching the surface. It's estimated that California has about 10 million more rooftops and parking lots that are right now empty, but would be good for generating solar energy. So this is the rooftops that would be good for solar. So this study has filtered out the ones that have too much shade or whatever. So that's about 10 million additional rooftops and parking lots, which is the equivalent of about 100 giant solar power plants in the desert. So just think about that for a second. All the rush to build large scale solar and wind. And then just think about what we're leaving on the table right now here in our state of California. Um, it's not to say we are not against giant solar power plants in the desert, just to be clear. But it is just to say that the less we have to build giant solar power plants in the desert, the more that all ratepayers will save money. Um, and I would call your attention, for those of you, you might have seen this article that was a few weeks ago in the Union Tribune, but the utilities love to build power lines, long distance power lines. And that's why they really like solar power plants in the desert and wind farms and offshore wind. And again, these things are not inherently bad. They are inherently good. We need that kind of stuff too. But just remember what the utility self-interest is they love that stuff because it allows them to build very expensive extension cords, as Bill Powers likes to put it, between those giant solar power plants in the desert and our communities. And SDG&E, right, on schedule, is planning to build yet another transmission line that's potentially going to run into the hundreds of millions, potentially even more than that, dollars. And so it's just remembering when we don't have to build a giant solar power plant in the desert, because perhaps we generated more electricity here in the community, we don't have to build those transmission lines. And that's a big deal because just to go back one, is that's what's driving up electricity prices in California. The reason why we pay some of the most expensive electricity in the country is because of those poles and wires. And so that's what a lot of this whole fight is really about, poles and wires. And the reason why it becomes a fight is because when we do more rooftop solar and we do less giant solar power plants in the desert, SDG&E's profits become less. SDG&E makes a guaranteed 8 to 10% profit on every dollar that they spend building new poles and wires and other infrastructure. The thing is that rooftop solar then takes some of that profit away from them. It doesn't completely eliminate their profits, right? Electricity use is going up. And especially now with all the data centers and whatnot, electricity use is really going up. So we're going to need to generate electricity from a lot of areas. For people like us that would prefer that electricity be clean, that means that we're going to need a lot of rooftop solar and we're going to need a lot of giant solar power plants in the desert. So you would think, what's the problem here, right? There's plenty of profits on the table for SDG&E. But remember that SDG&E is a monopoly and they are baked, they are wired in that their whole job is to make sure that they get it all of it, 100%, not 99%, and certainly not 50% or anything like that. So they are hardwired that they do not want to share with you. And they will do whatever it takes to get off the table anything that forces them to share. And that's what this comes down to. They are literally that greedy, and it is because it is the way they're wired. I would argue that if any of you were running SDG&E, you might do the same thing. You probably wouldn't because, you're just not that kind of people. but it's just so baked into their DNA that that's the way it is. And so their goal is to get rooftop solar off the table so that they can build more power lines and they can maximize profits. And this isn't just SDG&E, this is also Edison and PG&E. They are working hand in glove to try to knock rooftop solar off, to keep it from growing, and then to undermine it even for the people, the 2 million that have it already. And they're doing it in a couple of different ways. And it's worth kind of going through it because it's just understanding their playbook. So the first thing that they're doing is scapegoating rooftop solar owners for high electricity rates. Many of you might have seen this. Sometimes it's called the cost shift, is sort of like the parlance. But the bottom line is they basically say the reason why electricity prices are so high is because you greedy, scalawaggish rooftop solar owners have taken your ball and gone home. You don't pay your fair share of the grid, and you collect generous subsidies that are way above and beyond the value of your solar to begin with. And you basically shift all of the costs of running the grid onto your neighbors who don't have solar. Shame on you. That's essentially the SDG&E line, and they're very effective at communicating it. They are very aggressive at communicating it, especially in Sacramento. And they've been very, very good at recruiting proxies to repeat this garbage as well, including groups that you otherwise would think are like good people, like Turn and NRDC. And yet those groups have been enlisted by the utilities to repeat this garbage as well. So if you repeat a lie often enough, then it starts to become true. But especially if you have messengers that will repeat it, third-party validators, you can get it. So this is the first thing that they've been doing for a while, and it has sunk in Sacramento. Even among some of our pro rooftop solar champions, we've had to deprogram them and give them the data to just show what garbage this whole thing is. High electricity rates are high because of power lines, long distance power lines, and the utilities' insatiable appetite for building them so they can collect more profits. So that's number one. That's not even getting to the policies, but it's the context that they create that then makes it easier for them to kill off rooftop solar. The second thing that they're trying to do is then just to end net metering. Net metering, for those of you who don't know, is what allows when people put solar panels on their roof, the first thing and the main thing that it does is it just powers the appliances in your home. But sometimes solar panels make more electricity than the home needs at any one time. And when that happens, the excess energy goes to your neighbor. And forgive me if this is pedantic, but I always assume there's got to be some number of people that might not know this. That extra energy goes to your neighbor. And then the utility under the old net metering system will then sell that excess energy to your neighbor for the same price as the electricity that the neighbor would buy anyway, right? And then the utility then credits the solar owner basically the same amount. So the utility doesn't make any money on net metering, and they don't lose any money on net metering. And the neighbor doesn't know the difference. And it's an important way to make sure that that excess solar isn't wasted and that the solar owner can more quickly recoup the significant investment that they made in those rooftop solar panels. The utilities hate this because it just goes against the monopoly idea. Like, no, 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 we don't pay you, you pay us. And so they've been trying to get rid of net metering right from the very beginning. And they've been trying to do it in stages. The first stage was to get rid of net metering going forward, which they did succeed in doing. And that was in 2023. They basically ended the CPUC, the Utilities Commission, that's the regulators, ended the net metering program for anyone that goes solar after April of 2023. You can still get a little bit of money. If you've installed solar after April of 2023, you can get a little bit of money for your excess, but it's not really worth the paper that it's printed on. And so they've ended net metering going forward. But there are 2 million people that signed up for solar before that time who are on net metering. And so that's the second thing they've been trying to do, which is to retroactively break the 2 million existing solar contracts. The reason why I call it a contract is because that's precisely what it is. Those 2 million solar customers that signed up before they ended net metering going forward literally signed a contract with the state of California and their utility, a legally binding contract. There's 2 million of them. And they say that this contract is good for 20 years from the date that your system turned on. And people made very significant financial commitments on the basis of trusting that the state was going to honor that contract. But of course, the utilities don't have any scruples, so they have been pushing to retroactively break those contracts we've thus far held them at bay, and I think we might have been able to do that permanently. That was the epic battle of this year. And may I pause and say that if you were involved in that fight at all, congratulations, you crushed it. You made it the most controversial thing in the legislature this year, so congrats. But that's not all. These are just a couple of the things that they're trying to do. The other thing that these utilities are trying to do is to block what we call self-consumption. So net metering deals with the excess energy that you send to your neighbor. But the big banana is, of course, the energy that your panels produce that just powers your home right behind the meter. And they want to block that as well. They want to make it so that all that energy that either they would own it or that you are taxed for it such that you just can't save money no matter what you do. And so just to put that into bullets, they literally have made proposals and in some cases have been able to succeed in making it so that you can buy those solar panels, you can put it on the roof, but every electron that gets created is actually owned by the utility and you have to buy it back from them. And we'll get into some examples of how they've succeeded in doing that to begin with. They've not succeeded in doing this in the residential market, but they have proposed it for the residential market and they've succeeded in doing it in other markets. So that's one way they're trying to block self-consumption. And then the other way is just to tax it to death. Make it so that you can't win. You got to pay the utility no matter what. And there's two forms of this. One is just an outright solar tax, literally a tax where that only solar customers pay just for having solar panels on the roof. And there's been proposals as high as $700 a year recently to do that. And then the other version of this is something that you all might have now familiar with, which is this new base service charge that you're seeing on your bill that's $24 a month. The reason why it's not quite a solar tax is because everyone's being charged it, whether you have solar or not. But it serves the same purpose because a high fixed monthly charge effectively penalizes people who don't use a lot of electricity. And so that basically is two kinds of people. One is people that have rooftop solar, and the other are people that live in apartments and condos and small homes or who have otherwise invested very heavily in energy efficiency and conservation. And of course, those are kind of two sides of the same coin. SDG&E's goal is to make it so that you pay them as much as you possibly can and you consume as much electricity as you possibly can. And so that's another way to basically block self-consumption, is to just make that utility tax as high as possible. Thus far, we've been able to keep it relatively manageable. And then the final way that they're trying to kill off rooftop solar is just layers of red tape. Right now, the utilities are supposed to, when you apply and you get your system installed and signed off on by the city, the utility is supposed to connect that to the grid and make it operational within 10 days. None of the utilities are doing it in 10 days. The average is like 2 to 3 times as long. And then we have some examples where it's taking like weeks and weeks and weeks for them to interconnect the solar to the grid, which effectively means every time they do that, you can see how that's a business strategy, right? Because the longer they can delay systemically connecting it to the grid, then that's like that's a lot of time that you're not then generating your own electricity and thus reducing your electricity bill. And right now, there's no penalties. The CPUC could be penalizing them for failing to interconnect on a timely manner. They've chosen not to. That is not surprising to us. We are fighting that. Okay, so then here's the good news. Here's the bad news and then the good news. They have inflicted damage. So net metering, as I said, ended in 2023 for new solar users. I'm going to skip over that now in the sake of time, but that's another little thing right now that we're fighting where they're screwing around with the rules that could potentially mess around with consumers' warranties. They were able to end block self-consumption for schools and farms and other properties like apartments that have more than one meter. I'm not going to explain it, but in the Q&A, if people want to dig into that more, I can get into that backstory. But that's a big deal. There's this utility tax that's uncapped, which means that it could rise. SDG&E has said that they would love it to be $75 a month or more. So that's a threat. And obviously the lie that I talked about, the scapegoating rooftop solar. There are lawsuits pending on these first two things, so it ain't over. So, we never give up. The legislature actually voted to overturn this, but Newsom vetoed it. So the good news is that the legislature would love to change this, and we just need a better governor, which hopefully will be happening soon. We did wrestle down that utility tax. And so um, they've inflicted damage. We're holding our own, but it's a tough fight. But the other thing is we have blocked a solar tax now 4 times in the last bunch of years because of grassroots outrage and just the kind of intuitive sense of like, why in the world would you ever tax people for having solar panels on their roof? Um, Together, we stopped AB 942, which would have broken 2 million rooftop solar contracts. It's asinine that we had to fight that fight to begin with, but we'll take our victories. And then also, just because we're kind of awesome. When I say we, I mean you, all of us who are involved in this thing. We've gotten now most cities and counties to implement a new law that requires cities to basically automate permitting for installing solar and batteries. So in most places now, the process of getting a permit is fairly instantaneous, whereas it used to take days and sometimes weeks. And that's actually a reasonably big pain point that over time will help to reduce barriers. We need to do a million more things like that. But again, we take our victories when they come. You have been the reason for our success, and that is no BS. This whole thing is not our successes have not been because of clever lobbying or like brilliant strategy or like scintillatingly marvelous arguments or like some, you know, great thing on social media. It has just been because like gajillions of people have picked up the phone and called their legislators and things like that. It's nothing more than that. It's literally just power in numbers. And I'm really pleased and glad that enough people care about this kind of stuff that they're willing to act when the need arises. And so again, take a bow if you're one of the folks that have been involved in that fight. These wins have been very, very hard fought. These are just examples of some of the protests and rallies and other kinds of things we've done on top of just the bajillions of phone calls and other kinds of things over the years. Um, and newsflash is that we've done a bunch of analysis of some of the recent fights that we've been in, and the numbers really show a very clear story that legislators tend to vote for rooftop solar when lots of constituents contact them, and that the opposite is also true. And you might be thinking, well, like, no, duh. Like, why is that even worthy of a slide? But like, it's really crazy how the numbers show this. Like, that above a certain threshold of action, I can predict that the legislator is going to be with us. And below a certain threshold of emails and phone calls, I can predict almost completely that the legislator is going to side with the utilities. And the utilities and the utilities labor union is always going to be able to have more money. They're always going to be able to buy off the politicians. So what we know is we do actually have some ability to offset that so long as there is enough people in that district who are willing to pick up the phone and call and make some noise. And so that is a powerful insight that we're not just like pissing in the ocean. Like there is actually a method to the madness that can work despite the seemingly overwhelming power of the utilities, which is why, again, I believe in people power. You heard that in the thing, but like the numbers don't lie. The people power works only if there's enough people. So we always have to recruit more people. And so our priorities for 2026 that we invite you all to join in is we're working to just get more solar users to take action, either to sign up with Solar Rights Alliance or sign up with NCCCA, sign up with San Diego 350. I don't care who you sign up with. Um, but we need more solar users in the game. And obviously solar supporters too. I don't want to totally limit this to solar users, but you know what I mean? Like we just need people to sign up and dial into these fights and then just be right there when the threat arises or the opportunity arises. We will continue to block any solar tax or anything that would, mess with self-consumption. We are going to watch very closely to make sure that this whole nonsense about breaking solar contracts doesn't get any further. Um, and we want to keep that base service charge slash, we call it a utility tax, capped at $24 a month. And ideally, we could reduce it if possible. And there was an effort last year that a lot of San Diego area legislators participated in. Ultimately, the governor and the assembly speaker put the kibosh on it. We will look for an opportunity to do that again. Um, and then obviously we want to always look for opportunities to make it easier and cheaper for more people to get solar and a battery. And there's a bunch of new technologies that are emerging that I think could make it so if we can continue to just hold the line on some of the stupid things that the utilities are doing. You can help. First is just thank you. Keep doing what you're doing, folks. Like whatever you're doing seems to be working in this instance. I know it's, there's a lot of, discouraging news these days, but there is some good news, and I think we got to hang on to those things and just keep doing that stuff. I always invite people to sign up on our list as well. That's the URL right there. You should always be looking to get FaceTime with your state assembly member and senator. Whatever group you're involved in, if you ever are invited to come to a meeting, either over Zoom or in person with your assembly member and senator, do it. Do it. I swear to you, it is time well spent. That's the next best thing you can do, in addition to making those phone calls. I would encourage people who still read the newspaper, letters to the editor. We love them. They may seem a little like random, but it's like an awesome way for like people that aren't on social media to basically be on social media. Like politicians still read the letters to the editor. And a well-written 150 word letter to the editor is read by so many people, including politicians. So these are some like very simple ways that you can, even without a lot of time. And then obviously, if you have more time, we'd love to work with you too. But we always like to keep things simple. So thank you again for everything that you do, both pertaining to rooftop solar and just pertaining to making the world a better place to live. And with that, I will stop my screen share.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dave. Most encouraging and enlightening and so forth. I'd just begin with a simple question. The $24 tax, uh, is that does that apply independent of income? Does everyone has to pay that?
Unless you're on the CARE or the FARA program,
Hmm.
which is for um, low income people, and there's income thresholds. Unless you're on that program, which is a pretty small number of ratepayers overall, then you are paying the $24 a month utility tax. And I
Thank you.
believe SDG&E rolled it out this month. So whatever, when you get your SDG&E bill this month, it should be on there.
Yeah, it'll be confusing this month because I think we have a credit coming this month also.
Yes, that was intentional because they wanted to kind of like make blunt the impact of it. I,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
Great. Thank you. Kathy?
Sure. I'll start with the question Marion just put in here. Do you have a feel for how solar is doing in other states, Dave?
California is the biggest market. Half of all rooftop solar is in California. Half. And just kind of savor that for a second. Um, and there are some other markets that are like okay. Um, and I couldn't rattle off the top of my head like what the second, third, and fourth biggest solar markets are. Like I know like New Jersey is up there kind of pound for pound. Um, these fights are happening pretty much everywhere. I mean, I think like New Jersey thus far, it's not like there's places like Jersey where it's not, you have like relatively supportive governor and a PUC. But like I just saw like I think is it Nevada? It's either Nevada or Arizona just did a pretty nasty thing for rooftop solar, like a chart, a solar tax. And I see in Minnesota, they're dismantling the community solar program there. And it seems like everywhere we're going, we're hearing the same kind of argument, basically blaming rooftop solar users for, um, high electricity costs. So I think the challenges are kind of everywhere. And the reason why I think it's particularly tragic here is because in the Southwest, or, obviously this is where so much sun is. And so it's sort of like we need to punch above our weight, you know, even though solar is good everywhere. So sorry, that's not a super specific answer. I think what I can say definitively is the fights that I'm describing here we're seeing that pretty much everywhere in the country.
Interesting.
Okay.
Dave, you just used two words that maybe you could define and explain for us and tell us where we are in California. That was community solar.
Oh yeah, sorry. We don't have community solar in California, so it's a little bit, I suppose it was a little off the beaten path to mention it. Community solar is this awesome idea where, there's always going to be some people where solar just isn't going to work for them. It's too much shade, the roof is too old, they can't afford it, they don't own the roof because they're a renter. Balcony solar, we can talk about that too, is another thing that might solve that problem. But community solar is this idea where somebody could go and just build a medium-sized solar array, relatively close in, like not super far out, but not like right there in the city, but like, you use some vacant lot or whatever. And then residents can either buy, rent, or in some way finance one or two or three or five of those panels in that array. And then the electricity that those panels produce directly offsets their electricity bill as if they had it on their roof. That's the way it should work. There's like one or two states where it actually works that way. One of those states is Minnesota, and they're now dismantling it. It has never worked in California because even though there are laws that have been passed saying there should be community solar, as soon as the Public Utilities Commission, which is the regulators, get their hands on the actual rules, they set them in such a way that no developer in the world can make this work. And so it just never takes off. And of course, that's utility lobbying. So in the vision that we have, where we're getting to that 10 million rooftops, this would be where we run everything and the good guys are winning. We will bring community solar to California for sure, among millions of other things that we need to do to just take this thing to scale.
What are the obstacles to community solar in California right now?
It's kind of the same thing as right now what's holding back conventional solar, which is that, because the nice thing about residential solar, right, is that at least some element of it is just happening behind the meter. You own your house, you stick a bucket made of silicone on your roof, you tie it in to your panel, and then it just generates electricity. At some level, the utilities thus far haven't been able to mess with you doing that. And if you put in a battery, then it's even better, because then you don't even have to send any of that extra energy to the grid and argue with the utilities about how much they give you. The problem with community solar is that it's happening off-site, right? So you, in some way, have to have an agreement with the utilities, have to play ball with you, um, because you're using their local poles and wires to create a system where you could buy or rent or lease a couple of panels and have that offset your bill. And if the utilities don't want to play ball, or if the CPUC isn't willing to make them play ball, then it just doesn't work, right? And so when you get into the arcaneness of those rules, the CPUC has just set it up that it just it just doesn't work. Like no developer could do it and have it pencil out. They would just lose money on the project, and so it just doesn't happen.
Hmm. Thanks. Kathy?
Sure. So Bruce Bierman would like to know about being off grid, legality issues, any kind of obstacles put up by jurisdictions or any other considerations for going off grid.
Yeah, it a little bit depends on where you live. But people go off grid. They do in California. It can be done. Um, it's hard to do because you need to, if you're really going to cut the cord, then you really need to make sure that you have enough panels and you have enough batteries to make yourself, to make it work. No matter what the situation is with the sun and that kind of thing. So it tends to be pretty expensive, and you may not have even enough land, right? Enough roof space and enough land to make it work. But people do it, and there are companies that specialize in helping people go off grid. You can, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but this is where you just have to be a good consumer, assuming you're not so technical you could do it yourself. Most people are not going to go off grid, so that's why we don't spend a lot of time talking about it. Although there is sort of a middle ground way that you can do this, by the way, which is you can stay connected to the grid, but you can install solar to make it essentially non-exporting. Like you have your solar and you have your batteries, but you just decline to join the net metering program or anything like that, and you avoid all the strings that are attached with that kind of thing. And increasing numbers of consumers are doing that kind of solar. Also, if people have been reading about balcony solar, this is a product that has taken off in Germany, where you basically can plug a solar panel just directly into your outlet, right? That's kind of a form of off-grid solar because it's not touching the grid. It's just powering the stuff in your house. So I think there are going to be emerging ways that your solar can effectively, if not even technically, be off-grid while you can stay on grid. And that I think more and more consumers are going to be exploring that in the years to come. And there probably will be some people that are going to try to go off grid too. And like I said, it's possible, but it's a lot more expensive than any of the other options that most consumers are going after.
Mm. Dave, you have mentioned balcony solar as a solution for people who don't own the rooftop, to some degree. Earlier this week, I saw a pretty interesting article where a bunch of photos, a company offering carport solar,
Mhm.
or if you will, a patio. If you put a patio attached to your home or separate from your home, physically not attached, you can put solar on the patio. Do those systems work like balcony solar, plug and play, or do they have to be more like a rooftop system?
I think it's more the latter, and don't quote me on that. I'm aware of that product, and I've even spoken with some of the one of the companies that does that. I think it's Gizmo Power is maybe the name of it. Um, and I think that those probably are big enough that you have to kind of treat it a little bit more like a conventional installation and go through like, the interconnection with the utility and permitting and that kind of thing.
Mm.
Although that's cool too. That's again kind of goes into the bucket of like newer variants of rooftop solar beyond kind of like what we know right now.
Mhm.
Um, the thing that's cool about balcony solar, the way it's developing in Germany, again, it's in a regulatory gray zone right now in the States. But if we look at Germany, is that it really is like you just buy it at whatever Germany's equivalent of like Walmart is. It's like a toaster, so like you just bring it home and you plug it in and starts, generating, it starts making energy for you. And if we could, if that thing scales up here, then that becomes, I think, a decent, it doesn't send you all the way to nirvana, but if you live in a small apartment, where you're not using a lot of electricity to begin with, and you got one or two of those things cooking, in the summer, that'll reduce your AC bill for sure. And so that's a great solution for people. Or, you have a mobile home. You lean a couple of those against your mobile home. So I think that's a pretty exciting thing. And the carport thing is also cool.
Yeah. And they have battery optional, right? So you can add
Yes.
battery to it
Yes.
also, which has all the benefits of uh, being there in the evening and so forth,
Yep.
and the like. That's pretty exciting technology. I think you said the last time I saw you present that Utah had approved a balcony solar system. Is that a model that potentially could work in California, and how does that work?
Yeah, it could be a model. What Utah did was they said so long as the plug-in solar unit complies with electrical safety, it's
UL.
yeah, all that stuff. Then you don't need a permit, and you don't need to notify the utility. That's what I believe the Utah law says. It's kind of common sense. Um, and I could see something like that happening here. I think more work needs to be done on the kind of like just understanding the like so long as it complies with the safety codes, so I think there's some more research to be done. But I think that will have to be done in California. I think the utilities have already made noises to say, oh yeah, those things are great, but you got to interconnect with us. Well, that would defeat the whole purpose of going to Walmart and buying a unit and plugging it in. That's a little bit like saying, oh, you got to get a food handling permit to make dinner for your kids tonight. So like we got to make sure that we head that stuff off at the pass.
Yeah. Just following one more point about that, I understand there is some installations in San Francisco. Are those just a trial or a pilot of some sort, or is it
Yeah, it's
real?
it's
Yeah.
it's not at the point of scale. Like they're piloting, so they're jumping through all kinds of hoops. Again, like I think the dream is, you know, any schmo can just go to like IKEA or Walmart or whatever and just grab a couple of those things and plug them in. It's not there yet.
Mhm.
It is in Germany, but it's not there yet here.
Great. Thanks. Kathy?
Yeah, Dean Rosenberg was asking about uh, he's wondering why Congress allowed basically companies, corporations, to continue to get the kind of the, the the 30% tax credit uh, where that was ended for residential customers. And he's wondering why Congress did that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know exactly, but I would presume that somebody hired a very, very good lobbyist who is very well connected. Because I don't know
I
why else would that happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw that too, Dean, I that was kind of the question that popped into my head too. Why no for residential, but yes for commercial? And I assumed it's with the this administration. It's very very friendly to corporations and not so friendly to just individual um, you know um, rights and freedoms and power. But I actually got that thought confirmed. I have to just add this, Dave, if you don't mind, because it just happens to be very relevant to this question. I was listening to one of Barry Cinnamon's podcasts, his Energy Show podcast, which is, I think, an excellent podcast. And he had a bunch of leaders from various companies in the solar industry on for, gosh, I think about a week or two back to back. He had many of these CEOs and leaders of these companies on commenting about this very topic about the 30% tax credit going away. And there was one person he was interviewing that I thought this was really interesting. That person happened to have some kind of inside information about how the Trump administration was coming up with what to do with the IRA and how to scale it back or cut it back. And he was in on a meeting where the folks that wanted to do away with the IRA were basically, or that particular incentive of the IRA were doing or we're saying that the residential homeowners tend to cheat on their taxes more than businesses do. And that was their reasoning for taking it away from residential and keeping it for the commercial and business interests. So anyway, I thought I'd share that because I thought that
Yeah.
was very interesting.
Yeah, this will be a parlor game, for a generation, probably among us solar folks. I think, yeah, I don't know. Nothing happens randomly, and things only happen because of influence. You know, I mean, there's two ways of doing influence. One is money, and the other is people. So someone had influence somewhere with someone that got it, and whoever that is, we should probably find them and hire them for our own work, right?
Well, I thought that comment that was made during that brainstorming session was just reflective of just the tendency to favor business over individuals, and individual homeowners. And so, anyway,
Yeah, individual homeowners have a lot less power than, other aggregated interests for sure.
yeah.
For sure. Uh, I want to take a left turn for a moment and make a pre-announcement and ask your thoughts, Dave, that I'm planning to do a book club discussion, create a book discussion, invite everyone here to participate and your friends on Here Comes the Sun, Bill McKibben's new book. One of the amazing things in the book, it's an incredible book, I think, personally, but he points out that we can spend perhaps billions of dollars and take a decade to open a nuclear plant, and we end up with 1 gigawatt capacity and so forth. And today we can do an installation of solar with 1 gigawatt capacity in 18 hours. It's what's happening in multiple places, especially China. in the world. Uh, I don't know why we'd ever want to build another nuclear plant, given that kind of insight. But have you read Bill's book, and what are your thoughts about it if you have?
Yeah. So let me first say, we're Solar Rights Alliance, we're a membership-based organization, right? Like all we are is a network. Like, and I get to be somewhat of a vessel. A lot of and our solar users are a very diverse lot. So, I talk to people in our network every day who don't support nuclear energy. I talk to people every day who do support nuclear energy. I talk to a lot of people that think fossil fuels are fine, and they also like rooftop solar. And then obviously I talk to people who are more like this crowd that, is trying to basically phase out fossil fuels and bring clean energy. So if I'm wearing my Solar Rights Alliance hat, I'm agnostic on the only thing I am pro is more rooftop solar, right? So like I'm just trying to make that clear. So now let me just say, kind of go back and talk about um, what I was talking about a little bit in the presentation, which is if we just look, I know that this group, you're going to look at things through a climate frame, and I think that's really important. If you just look at things through the lens of cost, right? Like we want this state wants to get off fossil fuels, and it wants to be 100% driven by clean energy. Okay. And already electricity prices for the consumer are too high, right? So already electricity prices are so high that it disincentivizes people to switch to electric cars, to induction stoves, heat pumps, and that kind of thing. New York Times, did people see that in New York Times, the cost of owning and operating an electric car, you'd be better off just getting a hybrid car. It's actually worse than a hybrid car right now because the cost of electricity is so high. Like, so because the regulators have allowed the utilities to go on just an unchecked spending spree over the last 20 years, building poles and wires and poles and wires and poles and wires. We squandered the last 20 years when we should have been, trying to kind of conserve on that stuff. Okay, so now we're looking forward and we're going like the state wants to get off fossil fuels and we're going to have to, well, how are we going to do that in the way that's going to like actually not increase electricity prices so much so we can let inflation kind of do its work? And we have 10 million rooftops that are right now sitting empty that could power 100 um, solar farms. But if we want to just break that down a little bit more, let me just do some quick math in my head. I believe that every million solar rooftops that we get is something like this is very back of the envelope, but it's something like it's the equivalent of like 4 or 5 Diablo Canyon nuclear power plants in terms of capacity, something like that. Okay, so I just kind of go from like if we have that much rooftop solar capacity that we're leaving on the table, and we know that that requires no poles and wires, so like nominal investments, then why are we arguing about nuclear right now? You know, like, why are we not just going full steam ahead and outfitting every single empty rooftop that would be good for solar with solar panels and batteries? Because it's kind of like build that stuff out first because it's the cheapest. And then if we're kind of like still left kind of think like, and then do solar farms and wind farms, right? On top of that. And then if it's like, okay, if the last mile, you know, is we're still lacking, then I suppose we could have like an argument about like nuclear or something like that. But I just don't understand that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from is like, I kind of don't, I'm like, it's just what I said. Like, for Pete's sake, like we have so many empty rooftops. That's the cheapest way to get a crap ton of clean energy online. So like, you know, that's where I stand. And then like with
Why
my
would we do
members,
anything else? Yeah.
yeah, and then like I said, my members, some of them are pro nuke, so I'm just gonna stay silent on that because I just don't think it's necessary. More rooftop solar, everybody. That will reduce the need for us to have to make devil's bargains with things that have more trade-offs.
Great answer. Thank you. Kathy?
Do you have a good elevator pitch or 1 or 2 sentence response for all the folks, especially in SDG&E territory, who ask the question, why are rates so high? I know you've given us a lot of reasons. Sometimes I kind of struggle to keep that answer really brief.
Yeah.
So, do you have a good suggestion for us on how to quickly answer that?
Yep. It's the poles and the wires. It's SDG&E's poles and wires. That's why your rates are so high. Um, that's what you're paying for in your rates. It's what SDG&E loves to spend money on, and it's what they make a profit on. That's why your rates are so high. The way to lower rates is get SDG&E to spend less money on poles and wires.
Sometimes I add, they're building a grid that we don't really need. We need us to move to distributed energy as opposed to centralized energy generation. And so that's what I sometimes will try to add in there as to why they're just spending on poles and wires. Some people, if I say just that, they'll say, well, that's what a utility does. They have to do that, right? And, so then I have to kind of get into, well, we're making this transition from centralized generation to distributed. And distributed is better for people and planet, and it's going to be more affordable for us in the end. But the utilities don't want us to move in that direction. And so it's.
I mean, I think that's right, Kathy. And I think, like, look, there's no elevator. If somebody's asking the question and you have a chance to do an elevator pitch, it's an opportunity for a conversation, right? Like, presumably the person is interested. And so you have a chance to kind of like turn that from a 30-second thing to 5 minutes. If I just kind of use my pole and wire thing and then the person goes, well, isn't that what the utility does? You'd be like, no, that's not necessarily what the utility has to do. The utility in Vermont is actually um, giving residents batteries because they're recognizing that it's better that they do it, right? They'd like to sell the solar and the batteries because they can make some money on that. And it reduces the need for them to have to then spend so much money on the poles and the wires. And the only reason why they don't necessarily have to do any of these things. They can do the thing that makes actually the most sense and would be the most pro-consumer. They're not incentivized to do that right now because of the way that they're allowed to make money, but they are a regulated monopoly. The state is allowed to set rules that say, here's what you're going to do and here's what you're not going to do. And we just happen to be run by a state there where the politicians are completely bought and paid for by the utilities. And so the only thing that they're doing is that. But the state could make them do something totally different. Why don't, I guess another way I would put it is like, let's not assume that the utility should always be at the center of this whole thing. Actually, you can make the system where the consumer is at the center of the whole thing and the utility has to serve the consumer in what's their best interest. We just need politicians that aren't in their pocket and will actually just put the consumer at the center. And that's what all this work is all about.
That's getting pretty radical there, Dave.
God forbid we should put people at the center of a system that's supposed to serve them.
Kathy, I have run out of questions I wanted to ask tonight. Do you have more?
Well, I am wondering as we're talking about the reasons for why our rates are so high, how much do like stranded investments factor into the high rates? I mean, that's got to be part of it at least, right? I mean, we've got a nuclear power plant in California, and we've got a bunch of gas plants that are more expensive to run than building new solar plants right now. So I consider all those things kind of stranded investments, and they can be kind of costly to deal with. And I'm sure it's the ratepayers that are going to be, you know, footing the bill there for that.
Yes, yes. That so it's it's unnecessary spending on poles and wires over the last 20 years.
Mhm.
That's a big part of this. And by the way, over the last 20 years, peak electricity demand has been flat. So spending on poles and wires went up 300%. Peak electricity demand was flat. And this wasn't when the wildfires were really happening. So none of that is really about wildfire spending. So that's one. Two is these stranded assets. The utilities signed very expensive long-term purchasing agreements for natural gas power, fossil fuel power, but also renewable energy power. when the state first started making the transition about 15 years ago, the utilities locked themselves into these long-term contracts to buy renewable energy at very high prices that are very, very high compared to today. And this is actually one of the benefits of rooftop solar, like the 2 million rooftop solar systems that got put into place over the last 15, 20 years, reduced the need for the utility to have to sign those long-term, very expensive contracts. And yet that never gets factored into the equation. So again, like thank you, rooftop solar users. So yeah, all that's a factor. But those stranded assets, again, those are long-term contracts that will eventually expire. And so if you're kind of, if the leaders have their heads screwed on straight and you're just looking ahead to the next 20 years and you're going, okay, we have some choices we can make. Those long-term stranded assets are eventually going to age out. Um, we have already built these long distance power lines. What are we going to do going forward? Are we going to just double down on a top-down system where we rely exclusively on faraway energy that's connected by very expensive extension cords? And that's how we're going to do it. Or can we diversify and just go, do the thing that we've been talking about for the last hour? And we have choices, and those choices could dictate whether we bend the cost curve on electricity or not. And I think this is incredibly important for those of us that are concerned about climate change, because we are not going to get people to do electric cars and heat pumps and induction stoves at the rate that we're going. And if the state ends up doubling down on long distance power with all of the expensive poles and wires and whatnot, then I think we can kiss those dreams goodbye. And this is a major disagreement that we have with groups like NRDC, who seem to think, and I think they're living in a delusional world, where if we double down on a pole and wire driven system, somehow that's going to make the grid cheaper. That's kind of their philosophy. And I just think they're not just wrong, but I think it's criminally wrong. And I think, again, for those of us concerned about climate change, I think it's really imperative that we resist that kind of thinking and we promote non-wires alternatives, very, very aggressively, because I think that's part and parcel the electrification piece.
Mm.
We have to basically get electricity prices down to around like 15 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour effectively to make a heat pump really work if you're switching from a high efficiency gas furnace.
Mm.
And we're nowhere close to that right now, but rooftop solar and batteries is actually the only strategy to effectively make your per kilowatt that range. And so it's a gateway drug to electrification. And it's another urgent reason why, it'd be foolish for us not to be really going whole hog on getting those 10 million systems built ASAP.
Well, Dave, that raises another question for me, and that is, what levers can we pull to influence the CPUC and the politicians who, uh, are uh, doing poles and wire things?
Yeah, none. You have no leverage over the CPUC, is what I would say. The CPUC is an instrument of whoever is the governor. Right now it's Newsom. Before it was Brown. Before that it was Schwarzenegger. And in next year it'll be someone else, or in 2 years. So just understand that the CPUC is a tool of whoever the governor is, and the governor is just whoever the governor is. And that doesn't mean that the CPUC is a lost cause. It's just to say, understand where the influence comes from. So in this moment in time, where we have a governor that has effectively, he's on a jihad against rooftop solar. I mean, there's just no other way of describing it. Um, Nothing good is going to come out of this governor. And so it's really about the legislature and playing a longer game of how do you get, okay, so there's 80 members of the assembly and 40 members of the Senate, right? So you need to get 41 and 21 votes, right? And the name of the game is, okay, who's our 41 and who's our 21? And and then if we can, and we're not at 41-21 for these kinds of things right now, right? Like we're we're almost 41-21 in blocking bad things, right? But even with the bill to defend rooftop solar contracts, we lost in the assembly, and it was in the Senate that we were able to basically deal the death blow. And then let alone trying to do proactive things like some of the cool ideas we're talking about. So I think people like us who really care about this stuff, I think the place to be putting our energy is going like, how do we get to 41 and 21? And then that doesn't solve the problem of the governor, but we are going to have a new governor. And, you know, I think I would like to worry about that problem, when we have a new governor. Now you might go, okay, well, should we be trying to influence who the new governor is? All right. Anyone got 5 million or $10 million to, actually throw around in PAC contributions? If not, then we can't do anything about that. The governor race is working at that level. And so I'm more interested in kind of the legislature where everyday people can actually influence, where people go. And then by the way, I'm being half flip here. Like for those, if there's anyone here who is connected to real resources, it would be awesome to put together a PAC that really was trying to influence the gubernatorial race. But just remember, you've got to take a look at what IBEW and the utilities spend to try to buy off, candidates. And if we can't match them, then that's not the game we need to play, right? The game we need to play is the game where we can win, where people power really can make a difference. And I don't see people power making a difference in the gubernatorial race. I do see them making a difference in the legislature, and we do still have a system of checks and balances here in California. And I think that's where we need to put our energies as a matter of political strategy. It doesn't mean give up on the gubernatorial candidates. It's just be very, very realistic about just the incredible power that the utilities and IBEW have in influencing gubernatorial politics.
Good answer. Interesting. Kathy?
So, what are some of the better ways for us to get solar owners and solar fans more involved with your group, Dave, and getting everybody on board with helping rooftop solar?
So if everybody here, you might already be doing this, but if you are here and you have not recently made a list of people who are right now not a part of a group that you're involved in right now. And I'm keeping that ecumenical, right? Like this is activism is semi-porous. Some of us are involved in 5 groups, some of us are involved in 1 group, right? But if you have not recently, so for example, let's say you're a solar owner out there. First off, you should sign up with the Solar Rights Alliance. But like if you have not made a list recently of solar owners that you know and sent them a note going like, hey, you should consider signing up with this group, you should do that. If you're not a solar owner or that's not really your jam as much, but you're a part of NCCCA. If you haven't made a list recently of people who have a concern about climate change and invited them to sign up for NCCCA's list, you should do that. What I mean by that is recruitment is always best done when you're invited by somebody to sign up, with the group. And I am on a real mission this year to try to make everybody who I touch become a little bit more recruitment oriented than you might have been already. Now, for all I know, everybody here is already very recruitment oriented and you've done that task already. But if you haven't done that little piece of homework, then I would suggest think about the organization that you want to increase the size of the list and membership of, and make a little list of people in the area and send them a nice little note and bring it up with them. And a little goes a long way in this regard. So I think becoming a little bit more recruitment oriented is a big thing that we could be doing this year to just grow our numbers. Because I was just astonished again at the way we defeated the bill to break 2 million solar contracts. You could see in the vote count, people that got more, when legislators had more constituents contacting them, they tended to vote to protect rooftop solar. And when less people contacted them, they tended not to. And it really does come down to people power. So we need more people. Let's go find them.
Okay. I was wondering what your thoughts were on the Governor Newsom vetoing the virtual power plant bills just recently.
Yeah, I'm not surprised in the slightest. Governor Newsom, through his actions, have made it very, very clear that the kind of power, electricity that he wants the state to be investing in is long distance power connected by very expensive poles and wires. He has made that just abundantly clear. He's all for clean energy as long as it's that kind of clean energy. He's all for batteries as long as it's that kind of battery. And innovative ideas and solutions that run against that. He's just time and time again, been an obstacle to it. And I know his veto message was like, basically, we don't need to do this because the CPUC is doing this anyway. Ha ha ha. Like, give me a break. The CPUC is like the reverse Midas. Like anything they touch turns to just like ash. They are a terrible rogue agency that has like, I mean, again, just their actions have made it very, very clear that, they will do things that are very, very good for the utilities. They will never do something. This CPUC will never do something that is actually good for the consumer.
On that note, where's the antitrust lawsuit?
Awesome idea. I would love to have a sandbox to do some of that stuff. And if anybody is doing it, introduce me to them.
The
Love it.
Center for Biodiversity always seems to be pretty strongly advocating for things like that. I don't know if have you had any talks with them or
Well, right now the Center for Biological Diversity is a little busy, so let's have them win their current lawsuit, and then maybe we can talk to them about this thing. And just for people that don't know what we're going back and forth on, there are three groups, the Center for Biological Diversity, the Environmental Working Group, and the Protect Our Communities Foundation that have jointly filed a lawsuit challenging the CPUC's changes to the net metering program. Um, and we got a decent procedural victory this summer when the Supreme Court basically forced the lower court to actually hear our case, which you may be thinking, how is that a victory? The lower court initially said that they didn't even have the jurisdiction to second guess the CPUC. And then these great groups went to the Supreme Court and said the CPUC cannot be above the law. They actually are subject to judicial review. And the Supreme Court agreed. So in the next few months, these three groups are going to re-argue our case that the CPUC ended the net metering program illegally. And we'll see what the judge says. And then hopefully it's a good decision. And regardless, hopefully then they'll have a little bit more time to explore other legal avenues that perhaps haven't been explored yet. Great organizations. And it's another good example of how coalitions can be really powerful when people work together.
So I'd like to interject for a moment, Kathy,
Sure.
if you don't mind. We have some rumblings in the chat here that they feel like their questions might not be getting answered. So if we could take a second just to scroll down and make sure that we didn't leave anybody out. We have asked for people to preface their questions with the word question, and that may be why you missed it, because some of these questions are sort of in a lot of statements and stuff. So that could be part of the problem.
Oh, okay. So I'm seeing the comment from Beverly. Actually, I saw your comment, Beverly, and I was actually scrolling through and I couldn't find your question. I don't know if I didn't look hard enough. Anyway, you want to just unmute and ask Dave what it is you'd like to ask him? This is Beverly Show.
Hi, Beverly.
Are you still with us, Beverly?
Well, I guess not.
Other than Beverly, let's see. I didn't really see any other comments to that effect. But if anyone else feels like they want to ask a question and we didn't do it for you, please unmute and go ahead and ask Dave, please. I think Beverly may have dropped off. I don't see anything.
So there was one question about what incentives are expiring soon. If you knew anything about that, Dave.
Yeah, I can answer that. And then I think John Eldon might have been trying to come off mute and ask a question. So why don't I answer that? And then if John is going to do that, then we can do that too.
Yeah. My big interest is in DIY solar. I'm putting on a new roof and thinking about going the DIY route because of the high cost of getting a regular installation.
Yeah.
So anyway, thoughts on that, or does your organization have a position one way or the other on that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a position. Some people do it. And I run into people from time to time who have done the install totally themselves. I think if you feel like you've got, a handle on electricity,
Oh, that's my background.
yeah,
I
and
did before. Yeah.
yeah, and you're competent with your hands, and you can watch, I think it can be a great option for people that are technical. And there are companies that kind of sell DIY kits that are reputable.
That's
I
what I'm
think
looking
like any
for.
consumer, you have to shop around. Um, and they can, there's also folks that do consults, so you can kind of like hire a coach, to help you, so you're not totally in it on yourself. So I think it's great. Like, I would not do DIY solar because that's not my wheelhouse, but there's tons of things around my house that I've DIY'd. And you know, it's not for the faint-hearted, but if you feel like you've got the confidence on the, dealing with electricity and also drilling holes in your roof, like do it, go for it.
Yeah, my other quick question, if you don't mind, is there any incentive to face your panels west because of the duck curve and all that? Everybody wants to go south for maximum yield, but if I'm going west myself, it works well with my layout. But if more of us did west, we could shift the solar peak a little more in the afternoon.
Oh, can will you just bear with me here?
Hmm.
You just said the duck curve, and that is triggering for me. So I want to show you something because the duck curve issue is kind of ridiculous, actually. And I'm not yelling at you, John. Like this is a general thing. But so I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I just want to show you something about the duck curve. So for those of you who don't know, can people see my screen?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
For those of you that don't know what the duck curve is, the duck curve is this phenomenon where, um, you know, rooftop solar is mostly generating when the sun is out. But when the sun goes down, right? So that's nice, right? Like then it reduces the need to have to use other forms of energy, dirtier forms of energy like fossil fuels. But then as the sun goes down, you have to ramp up those dirty sources of energy. It kind of looks like a duck's head. You see right here. This is basically electricity production over a 24-hour period on a hot summer day. So you can see kind of that duck curve. And a lot of people note that it is actually kind of dirty to have to kind of not have a power plant, a dirty power, a natural gas plant on, and then you have to turn it on in the evening and then turn it off again. And so people have been concerned about the duck curve. Okay, so in other words, the duck curve is real. I'm not poo-pooing it. But here's the thing why the duck curve is totally overblown. So assuming we can all understand that the grid is built, actually the whole grid is sized to handle electricity demand on the days where we use the most amount of electricity, which is like the hottest summer days, right, in August and September. Just like we build a freeway for rush hour, right? We don't build a freeway for Sunday morning traffic. Um, and so this is a hot summer day last August in 2024. This actually represents electricity use from midnight to midnight. And you can see as the day goes on, this yellow is solar. This yellow is actually solar farms and wind farms. And then this yellow up top is rooftop solar. Um, and then this orangey stuff is batteries. This is large scale batteries. Yeah, and then this is residential batteries. Okay. So the thing I want to show you is um, this represents right here peak electricity demand total for the state on this hot summer day. But this right here represents the peak electricity demand that the utilities had to serve, right? Because this is solar farms right here. This is what the utilities had to serve. This is actual total gross demand. So in other words, if this rooftop solar didn't exist, this is 2 million rooftop solar systems cooking all at the same time. If this didn't exist, the utilities would have had to have served this load. You follow me? This is the peak right here. This is not the peak. This is the peak. And you guys, rooftop solar owners, shaved massive amounts of peak load. You solved the peak load problem. You solved it, right? Like this looked very different 15 years ago. This represents billions of dollars in infrastructure that didn't have to be built or invested in because the utilities didn't have to do that. So yes, this is an issue, right? But you can see it as a smaller problem than this problem that you just solved for. And the solution to this problem is more of this and more of this, more solar, more batteries, right? And so that's where it's kind of like for you, I wouldn't lose any sleep over the duck curve. I would just say, put in more solar, put in more batteries, and you're doing good.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marion.
well, I was just looking at Jody popped in the question about the incentives for rooftop solar and for homeowners, and are they ending soon? So I'm not sure if we covered that enough already, or if she still wants to know a little more.
I think this is actually good to clarify because we kind of we actually talked about sort of like a portion of that whole thing that won't affect residential. There is until December 31st. If you install solar and or you install a battery, you can get 30% off the cost of installing that. It's a federal tax credit. This is assuming that you actually have a federal tax bill next year. If some people, you're retired or whatever, you may not have a tax bill, you may not be eligible. But if you have a income that's going to get taxed and it's greater than 30% of the cost of installing rooftop solar and a battery, you can get a tax credit. That credit is going to expire on December 31st. And we're being told conservatively, you will only be eligible for that credit if the system is fully installed by December 31st. And I know that you may be hearing different things, but that's what we're hearing. So if you want to take advantage of the federal tax credit now by installing solar battery, you should do it now. You should also understand that most installers are completely booked up already. So you may have missed a window. But if you're hearing this and being like, actually, I want to give it a college try, then shop around and see if you can make something happen, you know? But the one thing I always say is don't get solar under duress. It's something that's worth taking your time doing. I think we started and stopped our process like 2 or 3 different times over a 4-year period before I finally pulled the trigger. And I think you got to don't feel rushed into any kind of decision. It's an opportunity that's going to get lost, but it's not going to be the end of the world.
I think Merrill had a good question here. He asked you to elaborate on the significance of the fact that utilities are inflicting damage by stifling self-consumption for schools, farms, and other multi-metered properties.
Yeah, sorry, what's the question exactly?
Oh, just please elaborate on the significance of that.
Well, yeah. Okay, so the way it works, so for a residential property or a property that has just 1 meter, this is simple. And so you put a bucket made of silicon on your roof, it generates electrons, the electrons go right into your house, and they supply power to your appliances, end of story. But if you have an apartment building, right, that has multiple units, right, and has multiple meters, what do you do? How do you make that work? And because you have one rooftop solar system that's tied to 1 meter, but how do you make that electricity jump to the other meters so that it can help the units? Or if you have a farm, right, and you've got your solar array over here and it's metered on one thing, but you want it to also supply electricity to a couple of different facilities like the milking, the barn over here that milks the cows and this thing that's same kind of idea. You follow? So the way that works is the energy from the solar has to jump in front of the meter for a brief instant to hop over to the next meter on your property and then go inside and then power the load, right? That's different than in a residential home where it all just stays behind the meter until you've just got too much to use and then it goes to your neighbor. Because it goes in front of the meter for a brief instant, the utilities have been a real pain in the butt about going like, oh, now it's in front of the meter, so you can't have it. It's ours. And for a long time, we won that fight. And there was a program that was called virtual net metering that would allow these, where the CPUC just said the fact that it goes in front of the meter is just like a technicality because it then just jumps right again behind the meter to the next meter, right? And so then schools and farms and other multi-meter properties were able to basically get the benefit of self-consumption in the same way, like they just counted it that way. 2 years ago, the CPUC fell prey to the utilities argument that actually, as soon as it goes in front of the meter, even if it's in front of the meter for like a nanosecond, it becomes the property of the utilities. And so in doing so, then they changed the whole arrangement where then it's not that energy now isn't the apartment buildings or the schools or the farms. It's now the property of the utility. And you got to like basically buy it back from them. And it's like then the value proposition kind of collapses. And so it's like totally stupid. And the legislature recognized that. And a near supermajority of the legislature basically voted to undo that and basically go back to the old system that we had fought to put into place. And then the governor vetoed that. So that's on our list of things that we will fix. And the good news is that the legislature agrees with us. So one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to show that this whole kind of utility crocodile tears over like, oh, we're concerned about the poor. That's why we have problems with rooftop solar. Okay, well, we're talking about renters in apartment buildings and schools in like, pretty working class areas. So clearly they don't give a rat's anything about, disadvantaged people. This is all just about them being able to make as much money as possible. And then they use those things as fig leaves.
101 ways to discourage self-generation.
Right. But we are
So,
fighting.
Dave, we have one question and another question that popped up from Bruce. And he would like to know if you could provide contact info for companies or organizations that will help with getting off the grid, even if you live in the city. Also, somebody mentioned just don't pay your electric bill and they will take you off the grid. Is this true, or will they put a lien on your property or some other form of extortion?
These questions are a little above. I don't know the answers to these questions. So if you could contact me and we could brainstorm together, but I suspect I'd be doing the same thing that you would be doing, which is I would be calling experts or Googling and trying to find it. I suspect you don't want to not pay your electricity bill. That just feels like then you're going to go into arrears, and I don't think you're going to want to get into that mess. Like I don't know. Your credit is worth something, and these
Yeah.
guys, they're just terrible. Or these are terrible companies that don't care about you. So I
Yeah,
just
I,
would.
I think that comment was kind of made tongue in cheek, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you're
yeah,
really concerned, about the credit, how it would affect your credit, and
yeah.
you could be penalized pretty heavily for that. So
I
I
wouldn't
don't
do it.
think we, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I wouldn't take that chance. But as for
Yeah.
like companies and organizations that would help you get off the grid, um, if I were you, I would just go use the internet. And then if you want kind of like a thought partner to kind of like help you vet, like, okay, who seems legit? And I could also ask around. I'm happy to do that. You should contact me. I can be contacted at info@solarrights.org. Happy to help.
Okay. Well, I
Most,
think we've kind of come to the end of our evening. Meryl, are you ready? Okay. So, Dave, again, thank you so much. And I will be doing a follow-up newsletter with the links and a link to the recording of this talk. And as you know, because I believe if you remember correctly, when you were here before, we have a tradition of purchasing a tree in the honor of our speaker. So we have done that again. So you now have another tree. You're on your way to getting a grove. So
Right.
again, thank you very much. And also thank you to Kathy for moderating. And of course, Joe and Meryl, who always do such a great job. And of course, everybody who showed up tonight. And thank you for staying informed. And we hope to see you next month. So take care, everybody. Good night.
Thank you,
Night.
Dave.
thanks, Dave.
Bye.
Good night.